Hello, and welcome to Wesley United Methodist Church of Trenton, Missouri. Our church is located at 113 East 9th Street, which is on the corner of 9th and Washington in Trenton, Missouri. You can call our office between the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday at 660-359-6762, or visit our website at wesleyunitedmethodist.us. Now we invite you to open your heart, mind, and body to the Word of God with Reverend Barry Bulware.
And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and killed him. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." May the Lord bless the reading of His holy word. Please be seated. I'll try not to move too much, Bob. During the time that Cindy and I lived in Arizona, I learned a saying from an old cowpuncher. And that saying was, "Never saddle a bronc that you don't think you can ride." Or basically, more simply put, don't undertake a task that you don't think that you can fully complete. Now, the funny thing is this concept wasn't new to me because it was really kind of how I was raised, but I just didn't know there was this really neat, catchy cowboy saying that went along with it. Now, Dad is really largely to blame, partially because of the stubborn individual that he is, that he could do any job, that he didn't need anybody's help. And Dad would undertake any type of job regardless if he had any experience in that particular job or not. You know, for instance, his philosophy was, like, why pay someone? We can do it ourselves. Electricity? 110 volts, that only just shocks a little bit. Turn off the breaker? We don't need to do that for this job. Besides, it'll trip if we short something out. It's Dad's way of thinking. What about carpentry? Dad always thought that's why they make trim, so you can cover up those mistakes. I remember one time when the fuel pump went out of the Suburban on a family vacation in Colorado, and instead of being logical, sane people who would take it to a garage, we got a fuel pump and we changed it out on the side of the road while on the interstate. And I don't think we had a very large selection of tools either. But, we did the job ourselves, and for the most part, we did most jobs pretty satisfactorily. But I can remember a couple of times when Dad actually had to eat crow and call in a professional to give him some guidance or to come help. And I'm sure that bit just a little bit, but he always learned something new from that experience. Mom and Dad were always very supportive of my brothers and I, and really encouraging us that we could do just about anything. So growing up, pretty much, the sky was the limit for us. Now, when I was a freshman in high school, Mom and Dad persuaded me to go out for a spring sport. I wrestled during the wintertime, but they thought, well, why don't you try a spring activity? I think they wanted something extra for me to do to keep me out of trouble, which is probably smart. Now, tennis didn't really appeal to me. I didn't have much interest in that. And track, well, I never really liked to run, although I was a pretty good short-distance sprinter, but wasn't much of a runner. But now I thought about pole vaulting. I thought, now that is something that sounds neat and that appeals to me. I'd watched it on TV a couple of times. How hard could it be? I'll go out for pole vaulting. So I signed up for track. I remember the very first meeting we had. the track coach had all the freshman recruits assembled, and he was just kind of going to us one by one and asking us what type of event we might like to be interested in pursuing. And when the coach got to me, I tried to muster up all my 5 foot of height and my 115-pound scrawny frame and just get up there as straight and tall as I could, and probably baggy shirt hanging off me. And he asked me what I would like to do, and I proudly said, I'm going to pole vault. Well, to this very day, I remember his response. He kind of looked at me and he grinned and he chuckled, and almost mockingly, he said, well, you can try, but I don't think you're going to be able to do it. Well, I was really kind of shocked, and I thought, wow, from a coach, I cannot believe that he just told a potential athlete, quote unquote, that they may not be able to do an event. But I suppose in the track coach's defense that he realized how difficult of an event that pole vaulting actually is. Well, my parents are both stubborn. Now, Mom encouraged me to use the word determined, but there is a difference between stubborn and determined. So I stick with stubborn. But I made up my mind that I was going to prove the track coach wrong, because some of that stubbornness is definitely rubbed off on me. Now, this wasn't easy. There was one older boy who pole vaulted, but he really didn't understand the mechanics and the techniques any more than the coach did, for that matter, as well. And so for the first year, I basically just kind of mimicked him, stiff poling over the bar. Now, the very first track meet that I attended, I was amazed. I saw, actual real pole vaulters, high school kids that knew what they were doing. I saw track coaches who understood the techniques and the mechanics of pole vaulting that could help them. And I don't know if these individuals took pity on me, my competitors and their coaches, or if they saw how determined that I was, but they began to teach me a few drills. They began to show me techniques. After the meet was over, they would go back and they would work with me on the mat. And so I took these different drills and practices back to our own practice, and I really began to improve. Now, one problem that really confronted me, though, was that the vaulting poles that the school had were very old and outdated, and they were rated for boys that were much heavier than I was. Remember, I was 115 pounds soaking wet. So we had poles that were rated for boys a lot heavier than me, so I really couldn't get the pole to perform the way I needed it to. So I went to the track coach and I said, hey, coach, I said, what's the possibility of having the school purchase a pole that's weighted for someone my weight size? I said, I really need this. This will really help me out. And, once again, the coach, looked at me, and basically he said, I'm sorry, the program does not have money to buy vaulting poles. They are very expensive, and that's just not in the budget. Well, I was pretty heartbroken, but not set back. I was very determined. And so I went home and I kind of pled my case to my mom and dad. Wasn't really asking of anything from them, but God bless parents. I'm the same way now that I'm a parent, but you do whatever you can for your kids. And so Mom and Dad somehow they found the money and they bought me a pole that was fit for me, and they even scraped up some extra money to send me to a vaulting camp that was coached by a collegiate pole vaulting coach. And that really helped me out. And I think, though, that properly fitted pole, though, that made a world of difference, because I really started to improve drastically from that point on. So a lot of the credit I have to give to my mom and dad. They really helped me out, which is wonderful. So by my senior year, I was consistently vaulting 12 and a half feet, and if the day was just perfect, and I did what I was supposed to do, and the pole did what it was supposed to do, I could press 13 feet pretty easy. And later on that year, I broke the school record, and I was the Midland Empire Conference champion. So I think I might have proved my point. Now, the scripture that I read today is one of the classics in my opinion. It is so very familiar to each and every one of us, and it was probably one of the first scriptures that we may have heard as children. About the story of David and Goliath. Just one of my absolute favorites. So, the Philistine army, they had gathered for war against the Israelites, and they were camped on opposite sides of this really, really steep valley. And the Philistine giant Goliath, every day for 40 days, he would come out and he would taunt the Israelite army. He would mock them, he would curse them, and he would challenge someone to come and fight him. And King Saul and his army were pretty much terrified of Goliath. They were just literally afraid. Nobody would go out and meet him for his challenge. So one day, David, who was the youngest son of Jesse, went to the camp. His father sent him there to check on his brothers who were in the Israelite army. Now, David was just a teenager at the time himself. And David heard Goliath taunting the Israelites. The whole time he was there, the giant wouldn't shut up his mouth. He just kept taunting and antagonizing. And so David responded, "Who is this Philistine that he should defy the army of God?" You can start to see David wasn't going to put up with this. So as we all know, David volunteered to fight Goliath. He said, "I'll do it." He said, "If nobody else will, I'll step up to the challenge." Now, it did take some persuasion, though, because King Saul really tried his best to talk David out of fighting Goliath. And David did this without armor or without any weapons such as a sword or a spear. All David really took forward with him was his shepherd's staff and his sling and 5 smooth stones. And as David approached Goliath, of course, Goliath taunted him, hurled insults, cursed him for a dog, laughed at him, "Who's this boy that he should come challenge me?" And David said to Goliath, he said, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. It is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands." Now we all know how this story turned out. David defeated Goliath, and he later became king of Israel. But a question or questions that I have wondered, and maybe some of you have wondered as well, is, why did David decide to fight Goliath? What on earth possessed him to take up that challenge? Well, for one, I definitely think that David could not stand to see God's army being mocked. I think that really infuriated him to no end. And, also remember that Saul really tried to persuade David not to fight against Goliath. Just didn't think it was a good idea, at all. And I think David probably had a little bit of that stubborn streak in him himself. He knew better, and so he decided to take on the challenge. And I think the most important reason that I figured out is that, David was basically confident in the talents and skills that God had given him. And, he had a point to make, and he knew that God walked with him that day and that he would succeed. There was no doubt in David's mind whatsoever. If you use the skills that God has already placed in your hands, you can do some pretty great things. Sometimes we forget about that. Now, each and every one of us in here today has special God-given talents that He wants us to use to glorify Him and enrich and bless the lives of others. And, we have to let God work miracles through us. That's our job. We're disciples here on earth for the Lord. And we have those talents to use. He's given the tools to us. We just have to use those tools to the best of our ability. Now, one of my biggest peeves is to hear someone say, "I can't." Now, I realize that we all have limitations. We all have physical limitations. I find that out, especially as I'm getting older now, and I'm not quite as old as some of you in the congregation. But, I do realize, that we do have physical limitations, and there are mental limitations as well. I probably can't go do math for NASA. That's never going to happen. But I do have special gifts that God has given me that I can definitely use. And, I think that if we don't maybe try to do something that God asks that is definitely within the realm of our abilities and the talents that He has given us, that it's a pretty big injustice, not only to ourselves but also to God as well. And who knows, you might even discover that you have a brand new talent that you never knew you had. Hey, Briley, what am I always telling you and Sadie about who limits you? Yeah, right, you. Yeah, nobody limits you but you. Nobody limits you but you. I tell my girls that quite often. Sky's the limit. Have that photo, Bob? The photo? Okay, Bob doesn't have it. Oh, there he is. I attended Prescott College in Prescott, Arizona, and Prescott's a non-traditional school with a philosophy that's based off experiential education. And Prescott's slogan is, "Education is a journey and not a destination." Now, one of my professors was Tom Whitaker, and Tom was the son of a Welsh Army officer, and he worked as a school teacher in the UK and a diver for a rig off the North Atlantic coast, and he also served as a nightclub bouncer in Gibraltar. Unusual past. Now, Tom arrived in the U.S. after working his passage aboard a 65 yacht, delivering it to the owner. Determination and ambition. Tom became a naturalized American citizen in 1986, and he holds 2 master's degrees from Idaho State University and pursued his doctoral studies at Colorado State University in the School of Human Resources. Now, Tom Whitaker is a world-class mountaineer. He's pitted himself against the north face of the Matterhorn in the wintertime, Mount McKinley, the nose of El Capitan in Yosemite Valley. On Thanksgiving Day, 1979, a drunk driver swerved into Tom's lane and head-on into the van he was driving. And it shattered both of his legs. Now, emergency surgery saved his life, but it also required the removal of one of his kneecaps and his right foot. And the doctors told Tom that he probably would never, ever walk again. Now, Tom's life, it really changed from that point on. His life really just begun. And he stunned the world when he became the first disabled climber to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And that was in May 27, 1998. Now, this was his 3rd attempt. In 1995, he came within 1,500 feet of the summit before he had to turn back because of weather conditions. Now, you think about what's impossible and what's not. A while back, I watched a movie that was titled Gladiator. And just a real short summary of the movie. It was about a high school teenage boy who lived in the inner city, and his father was a recovering gambling addict. Now, this young boy was a very talented boxer. This young high school boy was. But he was also very gifted when it came to writing. And he could understand Shakespeare, he could understand Thoreau, he could understand Davidson on the level of scholars. Just a brilliant young man. But his father, he had found out, owed some crooked loan sharks money for gambling debt. And while his father was trying to get his life back together, this young man felt that part of his responsibility to help his dad out. So he started fighting. He hooked up with a crooked fight promoter and found out he could make money to help pay off his father's gambling debt. But the promoter was really only out for himself. Now, one day, when the young man happened to be in school, in his English class, he was leaving the class. And his English teacher handed him an SAT study guide for the SAT test. Because this young man also aspired to attend junior college, but he just didn't see how he could do that. And so his English teacher, gave him the SAT exam, or the study guide, and she said to him, Your life is not about the talents God has given you, but rather what you do with the talents God has given you. You see, that's the whole point of this message today. Don't waste those wonderful gifts God has given you and placed in you. Use them to glorify God, to bless the lives of others, no matter how daunting the challenge may seem before you. When we start to doubt, when we start to despair, to wonder, to even retreat maybe, I want you just all to think about a sling and a stone and a shepherd boy named David.
Thank you for joining us on our pre-recorded Sunday morning service. If you would like a copy, you can contact the office at 660-359-6762 or email us at wesleyum@sbcglobal.net. Feel free to visit us in person or online at wesleyunitedmethodist.us, where you will always find open hearts, open minds, and open doors. May the blessings of Jesus Christ be upon you in every aspect of your life.